At the end of Wasteland 2, it was pretty grim for the Rangers. They ended up having to nuke their own base to take out an AI, and they were really sort of down on their heels at that point. And Wasteland 3 picks up where the Patriarch of Colorado, who's an authoritarian, reaches out and said, I'll help you rebuild if you give me help with some of my problems here in Colorado. And so that's really where Wasteland 3 begins, as the Rangers make their way out to Colorado to speak with the Patriarch.
We try our best to give Wasteland 3 the same flavor and the same moral questions and pathos and humor as Wasteland 2, which is a continuation of the traditions that began in Wasteland 1, which had all of those things.
We like to think about stories not just saving the world, but things that are more personal. And so that was one part of the things that drove us with the Patriarch, is he had an issue that he was dealing with that was more personal, not wasn't saving the world or taking over the world. And the other part was just, again, getting them into a new area, and we thought Colorado would be great because of NORAD and the doomsday preppers that live there. And also, we love the Denver airport and all the weird, superstitious stuff that's there. We thought this is perfect for Wasteland.
One of the characters that you'll meet in Wasteland 3 is Mother Nancy Reliance, who is the leader of the Gippers. The Gippers believe that Ronald Reagan is a god. They call him God President Reagan. And she is both Ronnie's wife and his high priestess. They may be crazy, the Gippers, but they control all the oil in Colorado, so you kind of got to deal with them if you want any oil. There's Sergeant Quan, who's the Rangers' liaison with the Marshals. The Marshals are the Patriarch's police force. Quan is just as corrupt as the rest of them, but he's a good guy, generally. He just doesn't mind taking a little money on the side. But he's the guy that sort of helps the Rangers find their footing when they first get to Colorado. He shows them around. He knows Colorado Springs really well. So he's kind of their guide and the guy who can get things done on the sly when they need that sort of thing done.
I think my favorite, which I would define as probably the most entertaining character, would have to be the psychopath. He's this, batshit crazy individual who is taunting the Rangers. He's on the radio. He's singing to the Rangers. He does horrible things to people that you meet along the way. He's very unlikable, but he's crazy. He's funny like the Joker is in a way. And so when you finally get to him, you're really there, you're supposed to arrest him and bring him back to daddy. That's your job. But he might have made you so angry, you might just kill him on the spot and deal with those consequences. But there's a third option, and again, we love offering that third option, which is you can get him to join the party and become one of the Rangers. And that's where now the whole world is going to react to the fact that you've got this crazy guy in your group, to the point where things completely change. I've said the world is always watching you. So there's a scene shortly thereafter where you run into a group of people who were previously friendly to you, who are questioning, why is this guy in your party? And then you respond with however you sort of rationalize it, and that turns into a fight. And now you're in a battle to the death with people who were friendly prior to that. And to me, I think it's everything rolled up to one. It's his personality, it's his barking along the way for the rest of the game, his commenting on what it's like to being a Ranger, making inappropriate sort of responses and gestures, and causing havoc to everything around you. So for me, I think he sums up to be my favorite character in the game for those reasons.
If you insist.
So one of the things we're doing with the new Wasteland that we've never done before in the past is for certain big key conversations, we bring the camera down and you actually get to see it from a first-person perspective. So much of the conversation is isometric, looking down like in the previous ones. But for some of the key interesting characters, we actually bring the camera down and let you have these first-person conversations.
Howdy, Hotlander!
Wasteland 2 was very episodic. So you would go to a town and there would be a story here, and you would sort of go through that story, and you go to another town and there would be a story here, and you go through that. The connections between this story and this story were kind of tenuous. Wasteland 3 is a much more cohesive, much more structured story. Wasteland 2 You sort of discover the conflict as you go along. In Wasteland 3, it is presented to you at the beginning, and you don't know if the people that are telling you what you need to do are telling the truth. And that's part of the fun of the game, is discovering, am I being lied to? What is the real truth here? Digging down to find who is really my friend and who is really my enemy.
We have these things called tropes, which are the things you expect to see in the game, and you need a certain amount of these things in a game that you expect to see if you're a role player. But we also like to do things they're not used to. So those twists and turns are a big part of what we really enjoy writing. One of the things that we like to do with our games is we create these sort of rabbit holes the player can go down, and then we pay them off. And so we actually have multiple endings along the way. So there's the ending that the writers wrote if you want the entirety of the game, but if you decide to take this path, it's going to get you a completely different ending. I mean, one with a credits scroll and the whole deal, and that's where the game will end, and it'll be a different story ending. And I won't spoil where that happens in Wasteland 3, but in Wasteland 2, you could turn on the Desert Rangers and become an enemy, and then you'd never have made your way to California. Or you could have got to California, found the bad guy, and said, you know what, I want to line up with you. And then you could have lined up with the bad guy and did a bunch of heinous acts in order to prove that you really were as bad as he was. So we love opening those things up and letting people dive in. With the Wasteland universe, it's pretty dark. And our players like that, and we put them in very tough, morally difficult situations. And I think we've done a better job with Wasteland 3 in making sure there's that reactivity is constantly paying off, that we're telegraphing it, and it's being reinforced all of the time. There's a great sense that the world is watching you. You know, you'll do a bunch of series of acts, and then an hour later, 10 minutes later, 10 hours later, you run into people talking about what you did. And there's this great moment where you're like, oh boy, they're actually watching this. And so I think that's what makes the world really sort of special.
Are your garments all spotless? Are they white as the snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?